Get off my plane. Now, before I have you dragged off. What would you do if a uniformed pilot pointed at your chest in front of 100 passengers and told you that the aircraft you had just boarded was not for people like you? Adiz Akafar stood at the top of the jet bridge, one gloved hand still resting on the strap of her leather briefcase, the other holding a first-class boarding pass she had purchased 14 hours earlier from a lounge in Zurich. The morning light spilling through the terminal windows behind her turned the polished tile gold. Somewhere down the concourse, a coffee grinder hissed, a child laughed, a gate agent called a final boarding announcement for another flight. And in front of her, blocking the entrance to a Boeing 737 painted in the crisp navy and silver livery of Vantage Continental Airways, stood Captain Roland Whitfield, 54 years old, 28 years with the airline, 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, and the certainty of a man who had never in his professional life been contradicted by a woman who looked like her. He had not asked to see her ticket. He had not asked her name. He had looked once at her long camel coat, once at her natural curls, once at the burgundy briefcase that cost more than his monthly salary, and he had already decided who she was. Adiz knew that look. She had catalogued it across 3 continents in 2 decades. It was the look people gave you when they had finished writing your story before you had spoken your first line. "Ma'am," the captain said again, softer now but not kinder, "this cabin is boarded. If you have a valid ticket, the gate agent will help you with reaccommodation." Adiz did not move. She lifted her boarding pass in 2 calm fingers the way one might present a passport at a border. "Seat 1A," she said. "Vantage Continental Flight 402, Chicago O'Hare to Atlanta, departing at 7:42. Purchased and confirmed." The captain's mouth thinned. Behind him in the galley, a young flight attendant named Corinne Bell froze mid-motion with a folded blanket in her hands. She had been a Vantage crew member for 11 months. She recognized the tone in her captain's voice, and she recognized something else too, the way his eyes refused to look at the pass. "I've already assigned that seat," Captain Whitfield said. "There must be a system error. Please step back down the bridge and speak with the agent." Adiz finally raised her eyes to meet his. She was 51 years old. She had built a company from a single leased regional turboprop in 2003 to a global aviation finance and asset management firm with holdings in 22 countries. She had negotiated with sovereign wealth funds in Riyadh, sold aircraft trusts to airlines in Nairobi and Reykjavik, and once spent 9 hours in a Tokyo conference room, outlasting the entire senior team of a Japanese carrier until they signed at 3 in the morning. She did not fluster. She did not raise her voice. She only tilted her head half an inch, the way a chess player does when an opponent has moved into a losing position without realizing it. "Captain," she said, "my boarding pass was issued by your airline. My seat has not been reassigned. If there is a system error, it is on your side of the door." The captain's face darkened. A businessman in the front row, already seated in 2A, lowered his newspaper. A woman in 1C looked up from her phone. Behind Adiz on the jet bridge, a family with 2 children stopped in their tracks. Somewhere behind them, a low murmur began to gather, the sound a crowd makes when it senses that something is about to tip. "I don't like your tone," the captain said. Adiz did not blink. "I haven't used one." That was when Roland Whitfield made the mistake that would, within a matter of hours, ground 37 jets across 4 hubs, freeze a $512 million quarterly lease payment, and end his career under the fluorescent lights of a corporate boardroom he would never be invited back into. He stepped forward, put one flat palm against the door frame beside her, and said the sentence that Corinne Bell would later repeat, word for word, into a federal deposition microphone. "This is my plane, and you're not flying on it today." Adiz Akafar did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She did not even lower the hand that held the boarding pass. She simply looked at the flat palm pressed against the door frame beside her head, then at the gold stripes on his shoulder, then at his face. And in that long, unhurried second, Captain Roland Whitfield felt something shift beneath his feet that he could not name. It was the sensation a man gets when he realizes, too late, that the ground he is standing on belongs to someone else. "Say that again, Captain," she said quietly. "Please. I want to make sure I heard you correctly." Whitfield's jaw flexed. He was not a man accustomed to being asked to repeat himself. In his 28 years flying for Vantage Continental, he had commanded cabins, silenced first officers, dismissed complaints, and walked past passenger service desks with the untouchable ease of a man whose uniform had always spoken for him. He glanced past Adiz toward the jet bridge, expecting to see the gate agent hurrying up to escort her away. There was no one coming. "I said this cabin is closed to you," he said, adjusting the sentence just enough to give himself room later. "Please step back." Adiz did not step back. Instead, she turned her head slightly toward the galley behind him, where Karine Bell still stood frozen with the folded blanket clutched against her chest. Adiz's eyes met hers for one brief moment. Karine felt something pass between them, not pleading, not warning, something quieter and more unsettling. A witness being recognized as a witness. Then Adiz spoke, and her voice carried down the jet bridge behind her and into the forward cabin ahead of her with the calm precision of a woman who had rehearsed nothing, because she had lived this too many times to need rehearsal. "Captain Whitfield," she said, reading the name from the polished brass bar above his left pocket. "I am going to ask you one question, and I would like you to think very carefully before you answer it." The businessman in 2A folded his newspaper completely. The woman in 1C lowered her phone. On the jet bridge behind Adiz, the family with the two children went silent. Even the youngest child, a boy of perhaps 5, stopped fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. "Is your refusal to allow me on this aircraft based on any operational, safety, or documentation issue?" she asked. "Or is it based on how I look?" The words landed in the confined space between them with the weight of a courtroom oath. Whitfield's face did not move, but a small vein at his temple did. He had been asked many things in his career. He had never been asked that, not out loud, not on the record. "Ma'am," he said, and the word came out tight, "do not accuse me of something you cannot prove." Adiz did not smile, but something in her expression sharpened, the way a blade sharpens when the last stroke of the stone lifts. "Captain," she said, "I have not accused you of anything. I have asked you a question. Your reluctance to answer it is not my problem. It is going to become yours." From behind her, another voice cut through the tension. It was low, hesitant, but audible. It belonged to Marcus Trent, a 42-year-old commercial real estate attorney from Evanston who had been standing 3 passengers back with his rolling carry-on. He had watched the entire exchange. He had also, unbeknownst to Captain Whitfield, been recording it on his phone from the moment the captain first raised his voice. "Excuse me," Marcus said, stepping forward one careful pace. "I don't know what's going on here, but I heard you tell this woman it was your plane. I'd like to understand what that means because I have a ticket for this flight, and I'd like to know if that same rule applies to me." Whitfield's head snapped toward him. "Sir, this is a crew matter. Please stay back." Marcus lifted his phone slightly, not aggressively, not high, just enough. "Captain, I've been recording since you told her to get off. I'd like a clear answer for the record. Is there a documented reason she cannot board?" The jet bridge went completely still, and Captain Roland Whitfield, for the first time in 28 years, understood the meaning of the word cornered. Captain Whitfield's eyes moved from Marcus Trent's phone to the boarding pass in Adiz's hand, and then, involuntarily, to the small black dome of the security camera mounted at the corner of the jet bridge ceiling. He had walked past that camera 3,000 times in his career and never once considered it. Now it seemed to hum with attention. Behind him in the galley, Karine Bell shifted her weight, and the folded blanket she had been holding slid unnoticed onto the counter beside the coffee urn. She did not pick it up. Her right hand had begun to drift, very slowly, toward the interphone handset mounted on the bulkhead. "Sir," Whitfield said, forcing his voice back into command register, "this is a boarding matter, and it is being handled. Please return to your place in line or the agent will assist you at the counter." Marcus did not move. His phone did not lower. "My place in line," he said, "is directly behind this passenger who is being denied entry without a stated reason. I'll return to it when she does. Whitfield's nostrils flared once. He turned back to Adiz. "Ma'am, one last time, you need to step off this jet bridge." Adiz tilted her head that same half-inch. "Captain, one last time. Give me a reason." The silence that followed was the kind that does not last long in real life but seems, when it happens, to expand outward and touch every surface in a room. The businessman in 2A had shifted forward in his seat to see around the galley wall. The woman in 1C had unlocked her phone and was now openly filming through the gap between the seats. A flight attendant named Devon Ash, working the mid-cabin, had stopped serving pre-departure water and was standing very still in the aisle, one hand on the seatback of row 7, listening. Somewhere in economy, a passenger who had not yet been seated was asking loudly what the holdup was. No one answered him. Whitfield exhaled through his nose. He looked at Adiz the way a man looks at a door he has already tried 3 keys on. Then, because he could think of nothing else, and because habit is a stronger drug than judgment, he reached for the last tool he knew how to use. He reached for authority. "Ma'am," he said, "my discretion as pilot in command extends to any passenger I consider a potential disruption to the safety or good order of this flight. I am exercising that discretion. You are not flying today. Now step back or I will call for law enforcement." The words hit the confined space with a heaviness Whitfield expected to be final. In his experience, the phrase law enforcement closed conversations. It made shoulders sag. It made people apologize. It made them retreat down the bridge muttering about switching airlines. He waited for that retreat now, the way a man waits for a familiar train. It did not come. Adiz looked at him for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, she slid her boarding pass into the inside pocket of her camel coat, tucked her briefcase closer to her hip and reached into her other pocket for her phone. She did not dial. She simply held it, dark screen down, against her thigh. "Captain Whitfield," she said, her voice quieter than before, which somehow made it carry farther. "I want you to understand something. You have just invoked pilot in command authority to deny me boarding without documentation, without cause, and in front of witnesses who are recording. You have used the phrase 'this is my plane' in the hearing of the entire forward cabin. You have refused to answer a direct question about the basis for your decision. I am going to give you 30 seconds to reconsider." She did not raise the phone. She did not name her company. She did not say a single word about who she was or what she owned. That was the part Corinne Bell would remember for the rest of her career, standing in the galley 6 feet behind her captain, watching a woman refuse to reach for the one weapon that would have ended the fight in a heartbeat. Adiz Akaffer was not going to introduce herself. She was going to let him finish first. Whitfield's face went red, then pale, then something worse than either. 30 seconds, he repeated flatly. "Are you threatening me?" "No, Captain," Adiz said. "I am timing you. 28 seconds. That was how long Captain Roland Whitfield stood in the doorway of the Boeing 737, staring at a woman who had not raised her voice, not shown her phone, not named her lawyer, and not moved a single inch from where she had first placed her boots on the aluminum threshold. In those 28 seconds, he did the math a man does when he feels the walls of a room he built for himself begin to close in. He looked at the security camera. He looked at Marcus Trent's phone, still recording. He looked at Corinne Bell in the galley, whose hand had now come to rest openly on the interphone. He looked at Adiz Akaffer's face and found nothing there he could use, no anger to feed on, no fear to leverage, no confusion to exploit. Just a stillness that felt older than the airline itself. Then, at 29 seconds, he did the worst thing he could have done. He turned to Corinne. "Get security up here," he said. Now, Corinne did not move. "Captain," she said, her voice small but clear, "sir." He turned back to her, and for a moment his face registered a kind of disbelief he had not felt in years. "What?" She swallowed. "Sir, I don't think that's the right call." Her hand had lifted from the interphone. It was now half raised in the space between them, a gesture that was neither salute nor surrender. "I've been watching. She hasn't done anything. She has a boarding pass. I think we should let her sit down." The words were spoken so quietly that the passengers in row 2 had to lean forward to catch them. but Whitfield heard every syllable. And in the 11 months Corrine Bell had worked for Vantage Continental, she had never once contradicted a captain in front of passengers. She had never contradicted anyone in front of anyone. She was, by her own mother's description, the kind of person who apologized to furniture when she bumped into it. And now she had drawn a line in the middle of a jet bridge doorway with a folded blanket at her feet and a captain 22 years her senior staring at her as if she had grown a second head. "Corrine," Whitfield said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Get security." Corrine's chin lifted a fraction. "No, sir." "Not yet. I think you should let her board." The businessman in 2A made a small sound in his throat that was almost a laugh but stopped short of it. The woman in 1C's phone was now openly filming the galley. Somewhere in row 6, another passenger had begun filming the aisle. Marcus Trent, still standing behind Adiz, had shifted his phone slightly to include Corrine in the frame. Adiz Akaffer did not smile. But her eyes moved to the young flight attendant, and something in them softened by exactly 1 degree. 30 seconds, she said quietly to the captain without looking at her watch. Whitfield's hand went to the radio clip to his belt. He unclipped it. He raised it to his mouth. "Gate agent, this is Whitfield, 402, requesting operations and airport police to the aircraft door for a passenger removal." He released the button. The radio crackled once, then a voice came back, tinny and uncertain. "Copy, Captain, are we cleared with dispatch on this?" "Just get them here," Whitfield said and reclipped the radio. Adiz finally moved. She did not step forward. She did not step back. She simply raised her phone at last, thumbed it awake, and pressed a single contact at the top of her favorites list. She did not put it to her ear. She held it flat in her palm at chest height, so that the microphone faced up and everyone standing within 4 feet could hear both sides of the call. It rang once. A woman's voice answered, crisp, unhurried, professional. "Adiz, you should be in the air." "There's been a delay," Adiz said. "I'm at the door of Vantage Continental Flight 402 out of O'Hare. The captain has just called airport police to have me removed from an aircraft I hold a valid boarding pass for. He has refused on the record to state a reason. Please pull the tail number." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then the woman said, "1 moment." The sound of typing followed, brisk, unmistakable. Whitfield's face began to change color again. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "end that call." Adiz did not look at him. "The tail number, Captain," she said, "is on the fuselage 6 feet from your left shoulder. Please give her a moment." The woman on the phone was Ifoma Diallo, 46 years old, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of Sable Ridge Aviation Capital. The private aircraft leasing and finance firm Adiz Akaffer had built from a single turboprop into a portfolio that now moved through the sky above 4 continents every hour of every day. Ifoma had been Adiz's second hire, back in 2004, when the entire company operated out of a 2-room office above a Nigerian restaurant in Houston. She had learned over 22 years to recognize 3 things instantly in her employer's voice: fatigue, amusement, and the specific flat calm that meant a line had just been crossed. She was hearing the third one now. The typing on the other end of the line stopped. "Adiz," Ifoma said, and her voice carried the small tightness of a woman who had just seen something on her screen she wished she had not. "The aircraft you're standing at. Tail number November 724 Vantage Charlie." "Correct." Adiz glanced up once at the fuselage through the small window in the jet bridge wall. She could see the black letters and numbers stenciled cleanly against the navy paint. "Correct," she said. Ifoma exhaled softly. "That's ours. Sable Ridge holds the head lease. Vantage Continental subleases through the Meridian Trust structure. Payment posted from them on the 5th of this month." Adiz nodded once, though Ifoma could not see her. "And the rest of the fleet?" There was another brief pause, the sound of Ifoma pulling up something larger on her screen. Then her voice returned, and it had settled into the particular register she used when she was about to say something a court reporter would one day type. "Adiz, of the 62 narrow-body aircraft currently operating under the Vantage Continental Certificate, 37 are on lease from Sable Ridge or entities we control. That includes the entire 737-800 subfleet operating out of Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, and Newark. The remaining 25 are financed through other lessors, but 11 of those have subordinated debt positions held by our credit arm. Adiz closed her eyes for a moment, not in surprise because she already knew the numbers, but in the small private way a person closes their eyes when a piece of information finishes arriving at the exact moment it is needed. Captain Whitfield had stopped moving. He could hear every word. So could Corrine Bell in the galley, whose face had gone very pale. So could Marcus Trent, whose phone was still recording and who had just, without meaning to, taken half a step backward. So could the businessman in 2A, whose newspaper was now folded into a small tight square in his lap that he had entirely forgotten he was holding. So could the woman in 1C, whose phone had not stopped filming and would not stop filming for the next 19 minutes. "Ifoma," Adiz said, still holding the phone flat in her palm. "I need you to do 3 things." "Ready?" Ifoma said. Adiz's voice did not rise. It did not sharpen. It simply became more precise, the way a scalpel becomes more precise when the surgeon's hand steadies. 1. Pull the master lease agreement for tail number November 724 Vantage Charlie and review section 14, paragraph 3, the operator conduct clause. Confirm for me whether the captain of an aircraft leased from us refusing boarding to a passenger without documented cause, in the presence of witnesses and recording devices, triggers a reviewable event under the discrimination and reputational harm provisions. There was a pause of perhaps 4 seconds. "It does," Ifoma said. 2. Adiz continued. Pull the cross-default clauses on the full Vantage Continental portfolio. If a reviewable event is triggered on one airframe and the operator does not remediate within the contractual window, confirm whether we hold the right to suspend delivery of leased assets across the portfolio pending investigation. That was another pause, shorter this time. "We do." 3. Adiz said. "Get Everett on the line. I want him standing by. The Vantage Continental chief executive is in a 9 a.m. board meeting in Dallas. I want him pulled out of it in the next 4 minutes." Ifoma did not answer immediately. "On it," she said, and the line went muted though the call stayed open. Adiz finally lifted her eyes to Captain Whitfield's face. She did not speak. She did not need to. Whitfield's mouth had opened once and closed once and opened again, and no sound had come out of it. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders had not moved, but they no longer seemed to be attached to anything. The jet bridge had gone so quiet that the small mechanical hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit could be heard through the fuselage wall, a low constant drone that had been there the entire time and that no one had noticed until now. Marcus Trent lowered his phone 1 careful inch, not because he had stopped recording, but because his arm had begun to shake. He steadied it against his ribs. Corrine Bell had not moved from the galley. The folded blanket was still on the counter. Her right hand had returned to the interphone, but she was no longer reaching for security. She was gripping the handset the way a person grips a railing on a ship that has begun, very slightly, to list. Captain Whitfield found his voice. "Ma'am," he said, and it came out lower than he intended, hoarser. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Adiz looked at him. "Has there?" He swallowed. If you'll just come aboard, I'm sure we can get this sorted out. There's no need to involve, there's no need for." He gestured vaguely at her phone, at Marcus's phone, at the camera in the ceiling, at all the small witnessing devices that had in the last 4 minutes quietly encircled him. Adiz did not lower the phone in her palm. "Captain Whitfield," she said, "I am going to ask you something now, and I would like a truthful answer. It is a different question than the one I asked you 4 minutes ago. Do you understand the difference?" He nodded once stiffly. "4 minutes ago," she said, "I asked you whether your refusal to allow me on this aircraft was based on how I look. You would not answer. Now I am going to ask you whether your willingness to reverse that refusal is based on what you just heard on this phone call." Whitfield's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Because if it is," Adiz continued, still perfectly level, "then you have not corrected an error. You have only confirmed one. You have told me and everyone standing here and everyone watching later that the rules of your aircraft change based on who a passenger turns out to be, not on whether the passenger has a valid ticket. And that, Captain, is not a misunderstanding. That is the entire problem. Marcus Trent, behind her, made a small sound that was not quite a word. The businessman in 2A, who had by now half stood up in his seat to see over the galley wall, sat down slowly. In row 7, Devon Ash, the mid-cabin flight attendant, had begun walking forward up the aisle without being called. He stopped at the front bulkhead and stood there, waiting, because he had been in this profession for 14 years and he knew the shape of a moment when he saw one. Whitfield's radio crackled. "Captain, this is operations. We've got the airport police at the top of the bridge. Do you still need them at the door?" Whitfield stared at the radio on his belt as if he had never seen it before. He did not answer. The radio crackled again. "Captain, do you copy?" Kareen Bell from the galley spoke before he could. "Ops, this is 402 galley. Please hold the officers at the top of the bridge. We do not need them at the door." Whitfield's head turned toward her with a slow, mechanical motion. Kareen did not look at him. She was looking at the interphone in her hand, the way a person looks at something they have just used for the first time and cannot quite believe worked. Ifoma's voice returned on Adi's phone. "Adiz, Everett Kim is on the line." Adiz did not move the phone from her palm. "Everett," she said. There was a beat, then a man's voice, tight, controlled, unmistakably rushed. "Adiz, what's happening?" "Everett," Adiz said, "I am standing at the door of one of your aircraft in Chicago. Your captain has denied me boarding without cause, invoked pilot in command authority in front of witnesses and recording devices, and called airport police to have me removed. I am on a boarding pass I purchased through your website 14 hours ago. His name is Roland Whitfield. He has 28 years with your airline. I want you to understand what I am about to do next, and I want you to understand that I am not doing it because I am angry." Everett Kim was 59 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Vantage Continental Airways for the past 6 years, and a man who had spent the first half of his career flying widebodies across the Pacific before trading the flight deck for the boardroom. He knew, better than most executives in his industry, exactly what a lessor with cross-default rights across 37 airframes could do to an airline in a single afternoon. He also knew Adiz Akafar personally. They had shared a stage at an industry conference in Singapore 2 years earlier. He had introduced her as one of the most consequential figures in commercial aviation finance in the last 20 years. He had meant it. "Adiz," he said, and his voice was very careful now. "I hear you. I am listening. Please tell me exactly what you need me to do." She did not answer him immediately. She let the silence stretch just long enough for Captain Whitfield to hear it, to understand that the man he had spent 28 years working for was not asking questions, was not defending him, was not even hesitating to take her side of the story as fact. "Everett," she said finally, "I need 3 things from you. And then I am going to hang up this phone and board this aircraft, because I have a meeting in Atlanta at 2 o'clock that I do not intend to miss." "1," she said. "I want Captain Whitfield removed from this flight deck, not reassigned, not counseled, removed. He will not command this aircraft today, and he will not command another aircraft under your certificate until an independent investigation, which I will name the firm for, has concluded and issued a written finding. 2. I want the flight attendant standing in the galley behind him. Her name is Kareen Bell, brought to my attention personally when this flight lands. She has done something today that most people twice her age and 3 times her salary would not have done, and I want to know her name, and her employee file is going to reflect it. 3. I want you, personally, on a call with Ifoma Diallo before the end of business today, to walk through the review of the operator conduct clauses across the full Sable Ridge portfolio. Not because I am going to ground your fleet this afternoon, Everett. I am not. I want you to understand that clearly, but because you and I are going to have a conversation about what it means that a man in your uniform, on my aircraft, felt safe enough to say the words, 'This is my plane,' to a black woman with a valid ticket. And we are going to have that conversation before it becomes a conversation someone else forces us to have." Everett Kim did not speak for 4 seconds. In the background of his line, Adiz could hear the muted sound of a boardroom, chairs shifting, someone clearing their throat, a door closing softly. Then he said very quietly, "Understood. All three. Immediately. I am dispatching our chief operating officer to O'Hare on the next available. I want to be on the phone with your general counsel within the hour." And Adiz. "Yes, Everett, I am sorry." She did not answer that. She only said, "Thank you," and pressed her thumb once against the screen. The call ended. The jet bridge was silent. Captain Whitfield had not moved from the doorway. His hand was still resting on the frame, but it was no longer flat and authoritative. It was simply holding him upright. Corrine Bell in the galley had let go of the interphone. Marcus Trent behind Adiz had lowered his phone at last, though the recording had not stopped. The businessman in 2A was staring straight ahead at the seatback in front of him with the fixed expression of a man who has just witnessed something he will describe to his wife that evening as the most unbelievable thing he had ever seen at an airport. Adiz slid her phone back into her coat pocket. She did not look at Whitfield. She looked past him into the galley at Corrine Bell. "Miss Bell," she said. Corrine straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Would you show me to my seat, please?" Corrine stepped forward at once, the folded blanket now retrieved and pressed against her chest again, this time with steadier hands. "Of course, ma'am, this way." Whitfield finally stepped aside. He did not speak as Adiz walked past him. He could not. Adiz Akafer walked the short distance from the galley to seat 1A the way she had walked into every room that had ever tried to keep her out, without hurry, without triumph, without so much as a glance backward at the man who had spent the last several minutes trying to send her home. She placed her briefcase gently in the overhead bin. She hung her camel coat on the small hook beside the window. She sat down. She fastened her seatbelt. And then, because she had learned decades ago that composure is not the absence of feeling but the discipline of not spending it in front of the wrong audience, she folded her hands in her lap and looked out the window at the gray Chicago morning and allowed herself exactly one long, slow breath. Corrine Bell appeared beside her seat. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "may I bring you something? Water? Coffee?" Adiz looked up at her. "Water, please, Miss Bell, thank you. And when you have a moment, would you sit down for just a minute?" Corrine blinked. "Ma'am, I have pre-flight. It will keep," Adiz said. "1 minute. Please." Corrine nodded and went to the galley and returned with a glass of water, and after a hesitation that lasted only a heartbeat, lowered herself into the empty jump seat directly across from Adiz's row. She sat on the edge of it the way a young person sits in the presence of an elder they respect and have not yet learned how to speak to. Adiz took a sip of the water and set the glass down on the small side table. "Miss Bell," she said, "how old are you?" 26, ma'am. "And how long with Vantage?" 11 months. "And before that?" Corrine swallowed. "Regional carrier out of Cincinnati, 2 years. Before that I was a preschool teacher." Adiz allowed herself for the first time that morning the small warmth of a real smile. "That explains a great deal," she said. Corrine laughed once, a startled, surprised sound, and then immediately covered her mouth with her hand as if she had violated some rule she could not name. "I want to tell you something," Adiz said. "And I want you to hear it." "Yes, ma'am. What you did in that galley just now, refusing that instruction, speaking up, it cost you nothing yet, but it could have. You did not know when you did it how this was going to end. You did not know who I was. You did not know whether I had a phone call to make or a lawyer to call or anyone at all in the world who would answer if I did. You did what you did because you were watching and because what you saw was wrong and because you did not want to be the person who stayed quiet. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Corrine's eyes had begun to shine. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Most people," Adiz said, "wait until they know how the story ends before they choose which side of it to be on. You did not wait. That is a very rare thing. I want you to remember, whatever else happens in your career, that you did not wait." Corrine swallowed hard. "Ma'am," she said, and her voice cracked slightly, "I was scared." "I know," Adiz said gently. "That is what makes it count." They sat for another moment in silence. Then Adiz reached into the inside pocket of her coat, which was still hanging beside her, and drew out a small ivory card. She placed it on the jump seat beside Corrine's hand. "My general counsel's direct line," she said. "If, in the coming days or weeks or months, anything happens at this airline that makes you feel you are being punished for what you did today, you call that number. You do not go to human resources. You do not go to your union. You call that number first. Are we clear? Karine looked down at the card, her fingers closed around it slowly. Yes, ma'am, we're clear. Adiz nodded once. Now go finish your pre-flight, Miss Bell. We have a flight to catch. Karine stood. She hesitated 1 second longer. Then she said very quietly, thank you. And she went. Adiz turned back to the window. Outside on the tarmac, a fuel truck was pulling away from the wing. By the time Vantage Continental Flight 402 pushed back from the gate at O'Hare, 47 minutes behind schedule, Captain Roland Whitfield was no longer aboard. He had been escorted from the flight deck by the airline's Chicago-based chief, a woman named Priya Ramnath, who had received her phone call from Everett Kim 18 minutes after Adiz Akafar had ended hers. Whitfield had not resisted. He had gathered his flight bag from beneath the captain's seat, unclipped his ID lanyard from around his neck, and walked down the jet bridge in silence, past the 2 airport police officers who had been standing at its top for the past half hour with the confused expressions of men who had been summoned to remove someone, and now understood they had been summoned to escort someone else. He did not look back at the aircraft. He would not fly a Vantage Continental jet again. The first officer, a 39-year-old woman named Catherine Boyd, who had been in the cockpit through the entire incident and had heard every word over the open flight deck door, took the left seat. A reserve captain was ferried across the field from the crew lounge and slid into the right. The flight departed. It landed in Atlanta at 1:47 in the afternoon, 7 minutes before Adiz Akafar's scheduled meeting at Hartsfield-Jackson's executive terminal, and she walked off the aircraft, past Karine Bell in the galley, past Devon Ash at the mid-cabin door, and into the jet bridge without looking back either. What happened in the 6 hours that followed would be studied, later, in aviation business schools and diversity compliance seminars and law firm continuing education courses for years afterward. Marcus Trent's recording, uploaded to his firm's secure server before the aircraft had even reached cruising altitude, was in the hands of 3 separate news outlets by the time it landed. The woman in seat 1C, whose name was Priscilla Vaughn and who ran a modest but well-followed travel blog, posted a 19-minute cut of her own footage to her platform before her Uber had left the Atlanta airport. It had 400,000 views by dinner. By the 10 o'clock news cycle on the East Coast, the words "This is my plane" were being spoken by 3 different network anchors, and by midnight the phrase had begun trending under a hashtag that Adiz Akafar herself had not created, would not comment on, and would never in her life use. At Vantage Continental's headquarters in Dallas, Everett Kim did exactly what he had told Adiz he would do. Captain Whitfield was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending termination within 90 minutes of the aircraft's pushback. An independent investigation firm, a name Adiz had provided through Ifoma Diallo before the flight landed, was retained by the end of business day. Karine Bell was contacted by the airline's chief people officer that same evening and informed, in language chosen with visible care, that her conduct on the aircraft had been reviewed and was being commended, and that no adverse action of any kind would be considered in connection with it. She would receive, 3 weeks later, a written commendation letter that would sit in her personnel file for the remainder of her career, which would be long and would eventually include a promotion to in-flight service manager for the Chicago base. The larger conversation, the one Adiz had told Everett they were going to have, began the next morning. It was not a single conversation. It became, over the following weeks, a series of them, involving Sable Ridge's compliance team, Vantage Continental's executive leadership, the airline's pilot union, an external panel of civil rights and aviation industry experts, and eventually the airline's full board of directors. No aircraft was grounded. No lease was terminated. Adiz had meant what she said to Everett on the phone, and she was not a woman who used leverage for its own sake. But the operator conduct clauses in every one of the 37 Sable Ridge leases were revisited, tightened, and re-executed, and the language that emerged from those revisions became, in the years that followed, a template that other lessors across the industry quietly adopted. None of this, of course, was known yet to the passengers of Flight 402 as they collected their bags at Atlanta baggage claim. Most of them would learn only pieces of it from the news, from their phones, from the videos that were still spreading. Adiz Akafar did not go to the news. The news came to her, as it always does when someone tries hard enough not to summon it, and she declined nearly all of it. She gave one interview, 3 weeks after the incident, to a business journalist she had known for a decade, and in that interview she said only what she had already said on the aircraft. She had not been the story. The seat had not been the story. The man in the uniform had not, in the end, even been the story. The story was that a young woman in a galley, with 11 months of service and a folded blanket in her hands, had chosen a side before she knew how the side would pay off. The story was that a lawyer in a jet bridge had lifted his phone before anyone asked him to. The story was that a passenger in row 1C had kept filming even after she had every reason to look away. That was what she wanted people to remember, she said. The rest, she said, was just leverage. And leverage was easy. Character was hard. Captain Roland Whitfield's termination was finalized 6 weeks after the incident. He did not fight it. He did not give interviews. He retired, technically, and moved with his wife to a small town in Arizona where his neighbors would eventually come to know him as a quiet older man who volunteered at the local library and did not ever talk about airplanes. What he thought about, in the years that followed when he lay awake at night, was not the loss of the career or the loss of the pension or even the loss of the uniform. It was the 28 seconds. It was the woman who had stood in the doorway of his aircraft and given him time to choose differently, and the 28 seconds he had spent choosing not to. Corrine Bell flew with Vantage Continental for another 19 years. She never used the ivory card. She kept it, though, in the inside pocket of her uniform jacket, transferring it carefully from one uniform to the next as she was promoted, as the airline redesigned its livery, as the years passed. She would take it out, occasionally, on long overnight layovers in hotel rooms in cities she had not expected her life to bring her to, and she would look at the phone number printed in small, clean type and remember the morning she had let go of an interphone handset and said the word no to a captain twice her age. She had not needed to call the number, but she had needed, more than once, to remember that the number existed. Marcus Trent's video was submitted with his written permission as part of the independent investigation's evidentiary record. He was thanked, formally, by both Sable Ridge and Vantage Continental. He declined any compensation. He also declined the interviews. He returned to his commercial real estate practice in Evanston, and on the anniversary of the flight every year afterward, took his teenage daughter out to dinner and told her, again, the story of the morning he had lifted his phone in a jet bridge because a woman he did not know had asked the captain a question the captain would not answer. He wanted her, he said, to know what it looked like when a person refused to be moved. Adiz Akafar made her 2 o'clock meeting in Atlanta. She closed the deal she had flown in for. She flew home to Houston the next morning on a different airline, in an aisle seat she had selected specifically because she wanted to sit next to strangers and did not want, that day, to look out any windows. She did not tell her husband about the incident until the following weekend, and when she did, she told it quickly, without emphasis, the way she told most stories about her working life. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, he reached across the kitchen table and took her hand and held it for a long time without saying anything, because after 31 years of marriage he had learned that some things do not need to be answered, only witnessed. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about courage and accountability, and comment with 3 words in English. Respect every passenger.